I am so pleased to be joined by Dr. Renata Archie, and she is going to talk all about data and assessments and data-driven decision making for our kids with dyslexia. So, Dr. Archie, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your background for our listeners?
Yes, and thank you, Kate, for having me. So I live in New York City, but I'm originally from California. My background started actually as an arts educator, a dance teacher. My classroom position after that, I was a kindergarten teacher for many years. I became a literacy coach, and now I work at the district level here in New York City, helping principals with and teachers with all things data and literacy. Outside of that, I teach at Mount St. Joseph University, several graduate courses, and a doctoral course. And in all of the free time, I also try to present and attend conferences, but most of my time is really spent working with educators and school leaders around screener data, and everything that we're going to talk about today.
That's awesome to hear. Very busy. So thank you again for fitting us in. So I want to get just straight into assessment data because for us parents, this is something that I think varies a lot across all the different school districts. I know here in Atlanta, what I experienced was not a lot of data, not a lot of data-driven decision making. And as an engineer, I love data and I understand how important it is for making decisions. So, I want to start right with oral reading fluency as a data point and an assessment tool because it's something I have seen used a lot. The thing though is with kids with dyslexia, my understanding is that reading fluency, which is the number of accurate words read per minute, is actually really difficult to improve, even if the accuracy part is improving. Can you talk to us about, is this a great data point to be focusing on, especially with our kids with dyslexia?
Yes. So, oral reading fluency is fantastic to understand how your child is progressing towards skilled reading. When we talk about fluency, I believe not just parents, but teachers always think of only oral reading fluency, but there's a number of other measures that come before that that are very important. So when it comes to being able to develop fluency with passage reading, we have to also look back at how that child was doing with some of those prerequisite skills. So for students with dyslexia, the progress will be slower. There's a need for more practice, and we'll talk about that more probably as we get through the conversation. But one thing we do want to see is, have they developed accuracy with some of the prerequisite skills? Were they able to, after that, develop fluency with that skill? And so some of the measures I'm talking about are first sound fluency, being able to just recognize the first sound in a word, phoneme segmentation fluency, which helps us with decoding. It also helps us with spelling. So if I was able to develop accuracy with that and also automatize it, become very fluent with it, where it's running in the background. And then one of the most important ones that I know we may talk about too, which is nonsense word fluency, which is a great pure measure of my ability to decode novel words fluently. So that all has to be secure and automatic. And I'm applying that to reading a passage. So I mention it because once I am reading a passage, say I'm a grade 3 student, maybe I'm working on a grade 2 or grade 1 level oral reading fluency. I want to make sure as the teacher that that student is accurate with the words first and then becoming more fluent with it. And it will take longer for a student that has dyslexia. And it just means more opportunities for practice to build fluency.
It helps frame it in my mind well because what you're saying is oral reading fluency is kind of measuring the whole skill, but there's component skills underneath. And
Yes.
so is it important to measure those component skills as well so that you know where or sort of what's holding the oral reading fluency back?
Yes. So just like I mentioned, I will just imagine we have a grade 4 student. This is something I do each day in a school. I may have administered a grade 4 level ORF, and that student was below or well below. I also have the opportunity to what we call drill back to see where the student where the student can succeed. So it tells me what they
Mhm.
can do and then when they're struggling. So say this student was struggling deeply, and I drilled back. I did grade 3. That student didn't meet benchmark. I did grade 2. After grade 1, that's when we get back to the measures I just mentioned.
Okay.
So depending on where the student is, I may find that they are meeting benchmark with the phoneme segmentation, but their struggle begins right there at nonsense word. So that's where I want to give assistance with that skill and start to develop that accuracy and fluency. Maybe the student benchmarked at grade 1, and so we're going to work on grade 2 level oral reading fluency, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So it's a just right match to where the student's skill need is. And we are going to be giving them extra practice with that level and gathering progress monitoring points to ensure the support that we're offering is causing growth. So we want to be monitoring that to make sure that whatever we're doing is actually causing a positive impact.
Right. That makes so much sense. So what you're saying is that say that the phoneme segmentation, which there may be some parents who haven't learned that term yet. And so
Mhm.
just to confirm, that's like if they hear the word ship, they can break apart the individual sounds like sh, it, right? So if they
Yes.
can do that, but they're struggling with nonsense words, would that be that their ability to see a grapheme and know the sound is maybe the weak link, possibly?
Yes. So I'm glad you pinpointed nonsense words. All of us who love assessment, that's one of our very favorite because it can tell you a great deal about how a student is decoding and where they are
Mhm.
on the continuum. So a lot of parents want to know why nonsense words. So CVC, which means consonant, vowel, consonant.
Uh-huh.
That's like one of the very basic patterns of a word. Students, when they are in kindergarten, we're learning to match that grapheme, that symbol to the sound accurately. What does that letter represent? When I see it with sound, and we're learning to blend the sounds together to read a CVC word. So it is possible that a kindergarten or grade 1 student has seen the word mat or bug or ship, like you said. So the reason we use nonsense words, they are constructed in an English CVC pattern, but most likely we've never seen them before. So it's like
Mhm.
I say like a dipstick when you check the oil. We're checking to see how you can apply your knowledge of letter sound correspondence and blending a word. And so the goal is for the student to see the word and blend it. But what you will find is you'll see students on a continuum. Sometimes the student might just bounce on the sound and give you the sounds, and they don't know how to
Mhm.
blend yet. That tells you a lot about what kind of practice might need to happen. I've seen response patterns, is what we call them, where the student makes the sound, and then blends it. So that tells me this student does understand that the goal is to read it, but they did need to do that almost like scaffold or
Mhm.
prerequisite skill. And so then the practice I give is going to help them leave that training wheel kind of behind.
Right.
And yes, and as I was thinking about what we talk about today, something that I often tell teachers when we look at response patterns is make sure, and when you're teaching in the classroom, not just for an assessment, make sure that the child actually understands what the goal is.
Mm.
So we gather assessment data to inform where you are, what do you know, and what do we need to work on. But we also want to make sure that's part of structured literacy. We want to be clear. Make sure the child understands what the goal is. Why am I doing this skill? What does it mean? And I think that piece sometimes is missing. We don't want to be mysterious with students or obscure, where they don't understand what this little building block is how it's going to help me to read or spell. So I think it's important that teachers also let students know when they are when they are, having activities in the classroom where they're building words, blending words, and even when they're going to, I never tell a student we're going to test you or we're going to do an assessment. No, I
Mm,
say we're going to do a little activity, but I want to make sure
mhm.
they understand what we're doing and why those words are like that, and then they get it. You'll sometimes see the aha in the child themselves and go, okay, I get it.
That makes so much sense. I mean, if you were to try to motivate an adult to do anything without telling them why, you'd have a pretty difficult time. So, um,
Yes.
I like that piece of advice. I think that's really important. And so you're talking about how you notice where maybe the weak links are. And I really like the way you framed it for stepping back and finding those holes and finding out where the child is now. So, what are some activities that you usually recommend? Like, if the nonsense word decoding is really weak, if they can't even do the nonsense word decoding, for example, if that just is completely overwhelming, what are some activities that really work? Because as a parent, you go on the dyslexia support groups and everyone is very passionate, but they're all conflicting and they're all over their place. What are those evidence-based activities that actually work improving the decoding and the reading and the spelling?
Yes. So I know everyone is very passionate about programs, and I do want to caution parents from and teachers about getting caught up in the detail and minutia of it all. I will repeat this probably over and over again. A skilled, knowledgeable teacher is the biggest piece of the equation. We have experts and scholars in the field like Louisa Moats who tell us, a program is a program. Teachers teach students, not programs. And so when I do work with educators and we're planning and we're looking at data, I try to help them understand that, we have programs that are quote imperfect. Yes, there's red flags, but what the most important thing is that we adults have a really good idea of what we're talking about here is where do I need this child to be by May, June? What goal am I moving them toward? And what skill do they need at this time, at this age, for me to know that they are progressing towards being a skilled reader? And if I know that, and I'll give you some idea, in terms of structured literacy, the how we are delivering instruction is the most important thing. So some of the programs I know you did mention that parents and schools are using or thinking about, most of them are excellent. Are they the same? No, they have different, but we want mastery based programs, which
Mhm,
means, and that's something that I know, how we even have gotten here, this crisis in this country, where certain types of practice were removed from our classrooms. So all of the skills we're talking about, I need to be running in the background in my long term memory. I need to be able to access and apply these skills without any cognitive effort. And
mhm,
once I have that, then I'll be able to apply and use them in service of. So when it
mhm,
comes to being able to segment and blend, that's something we want to get to the point of mastery. L. Conan boxes, all sorts of blending, grapheme, phoneme activities. All of these things are wonderful. But for the purpose of our conversation and a child with dyslexia, what we need is much more practice. So the same practice that a typical child needs to become fluent with a skill is the same that a dyslexic child might need. They
mhm,
just need much more explicit, direct, systematic instruction. So if as a teacher, I say, oh, I taught it today. And then tomorrow, or it's Friday today, Monday I come and I say, and I see that you forgot it. I did not offer you enough opportunities to practice. I just gave you kind of an exposure, and that's not
mhm,
sufficient. So I think the biggest thing when it comes to what are we using, there's some programs out there and we have to stop using our energy to argue about that and just talk to teachers about giving more practice. And when I talked about response patterns, showing me where a student is, we
mhm.
can sometimes mismatch what we're doing with what the student needs at that time. And so those are the
Mhm.
things that we want to make sure we get right.
Absolutely. I like the way that you explained that. And so going back to the assessment and knowing and monitoring the child so that you know what extra practice they need. What are the key metrics? So we've talked about oral fluency, we've talked about being able to blend and segment, and we've talked about applying the blending and segmenting to nonsense words. What are the other metrics that we should be tracking and how frequently? Because I know the progress is slow and like you said, they need a lot of repetition. So what is the right cadence for those key metrics?
So depending where a student is, the metric would be different. If
Mhm.
depending on my age, grade, and where I'm struggling. Right now, when I work with kindergarten teachers, I see kindergartners who might be still struggling with first sound fluency. So I might be watching that. I might be
Okay.
watching phoneme segmentation fluency. One thing I want to make sure, I always make sure educators and parents realize we can't watch all the things at once. I will definitely be struggling with a skill that is beyond me right now that I just haven't learned yet. But we have to figure out what is the lowest skill that I need to work on now. And that's the one we're going to match your intervention and extra practice with. And that's the one
Mhm.
I'm going to progress monitor. So, progress monitoring, if we think about it like this, if I'm receiving extra practice during the week, I want to know that what I'm receiving as a child, it needs to be causing growth and learning. So weekly, especially if we're talking about struggling readers, I need to know that. Imagine if it's biweekly or if it's monthly, I would have to wait weeks or months
Mhm.
to see data points moving towards a goal that I set. So that's time lost. What if the practice is not a match and those data points are kind of stagnant or they're regressing?
Mhm.
We've lost a lot of time not realizing that what we've been doing is not working. So, weekly or biweekly, especially if a student is struggling, older students struggling with some of these skills that we're discussing, like nonsense words, I do need to see weekly that we are moving and accelerating your growth.
And so I like the way you say that it's, first of all, weekly so we don't lose time, but also that you can't track everything at once because you also can't instruct them on everything at once. And if the data is informing the instruction, hone in, like the data, focus on
Right.
what you're tracking and what you're working on. And so, would you be tracking if a child was, say, in first or second grade and behind, and you had identified gaps in the phonics sequence, and so you were going back to fill those in? Would it be that? Would the assessment and monitoring be that focused, like on, say, our controlled words? So you are really working on our control words, and are you tracking that level of detail? Or is it a little bit broader?
So that's a wonderful question. So there's two different types of checking that we do. There are, I'm sure you've heard about essential predictive skills, and that's what we've been talking about up to now. So
Mhm,
those essential predictive skills that have been studied and some of the wonderful screeners that are available to us, they capture fluency data. Those are, they're capturing data about phonemic awareness, they're capturing data about decoding and the alphabetic principles, so that would be nonsense word, and they're capturing data about fluency, oral reading fluency, which is passage reading. And then as we get to the older grades, you have something called maze, which is when a child is reading a passage and along comes a word that's missing. They have to decide which vocabulary word fits and then continue. It's pretty challenging because they
mhm,
have to hold understanding and make a decision. So those are the essential skills. Now, if a student is receiving instruction or intervention in the phonics sequence, they're learning specific spelling patterns, and there's going to be, in whatever the program is, some sort of unit or weekly assessment, something quick where I can measure, did you learn what I just taught? So those are
mhm,
a little different than a
mhm,
screener. And they should be brief, just like, just for me to check and if I need to reteach. So you do
mhm.
want to know both. I don't want to
Okay.
move along from our controlled. to the next one and you didn't grasp that, if that makes sense. So those are they're little different, but both important.
And so for those broader skills, what can we be expecting as parents? And I know that's a hard question because dyslexia is on a continuum and it's different for all kids. But, if they're getting the right intervention, how do we know it's working? What should we be expecting to see in terms of progress?
So, depending on how impacted the child is by dyslexia, it will look different. One of the key ingredients, like I said, is a knowledgeable teacher who not just only knows how to deliver instruction well, but understands what we're talking about, which is how to look at screener data, diagnostic data, how to match the proper practice with where the student is, and how to also be responsive to the data and shift and be flexible when the child needs that.
Mhm.
No matter where that child is, if there's a severe dyslexic tendencies, it takes much more practice and it takes longer. But that educator and their knowledge of how to adjust is going to be
Mhm.
key. If I am matched well and I am gathering that progress monitoring data, we should see the student moving. So there's no answer exactly to, how quickly, because that's going to depend. Your child is going to be different than the next child. But I think the biggest thing is that we are matching the practice to where the child is. We know exactly where they are and giving them as much error-free practice and repeated opportunities. And I always tell teachers successful practice. I
Mm.
can't have practice where I'm struggling or where I'm making errors. So if we can get all of those ingredients right, that should cause positive growth.
I'm glad you said that. And I've talked about this on other episodes, but I think parents don't understand. I didn't understand, so I'll just speak for myself, the importance of them being at their level. You kind of see them behind and you want to give them something more challenging. And I learned the hard way how counterproductive that can be. And so when you're giving them this practice, you think like they're getting it accurate and you think, oh, they got it. They can move on. But accuracy is really just the beginning. They do actually need additional accurate practice. Like that is them learning. That doesn't just automatically mean they're ready for something more challenging.
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes, I was going to describe a conversation I had with some educators recently to help them understand that. If you imagine in class, we are learning CVC and the students have just learned short E. So they have a lot of words with short E in the middle. Sometimes teachers are not realizing if I go and try to mix that up and we have words with short I and short A, just that, it's not small, it's actually huge. Just that can frustrate students. So I know you may have had other guests that talk about types of practice. So introducing one concept, making sure I have that to a certain confidence level and
Hmm.
automaticity. And then I may learn a new one and get it to that point. And then I may present you with both. Then we have
Hmm.
some words with short E and short I. So if you apply that thinking to other things that are more complex and even more complex spelling patterns and things we're asking. And we, like you said, understand the cognitive load we might be placing on a child, then yeah, I think we can see more positive growth when we understand what's happening.
I think that compare and contrast part from what I've seen from my daughter is the most challenging. She actually can quickly learn a skill, but it's the compare and contrast part that becomes difficult if we've moved on too quickly. If she looks like she's got it, but she actually needs to drill it in more. Just to give parents an example, that's like if there's comparing star and stare. If you've learned silent E, which would be the stare, A-R-E. And now you're learning R controlled, where in star it says R. That's the tricky thing to start comparing. And if both of those R controlled and the silent E words aren't really solid, it's even more challenging. A lot of parents talk a lot about whether their child is reading on grade level. Is that even a worthwhile metric? to be focused on?
So reading on grade level sometimes is associated with what we used to do, which is give students leveled readers. And that was something even as a kindergarten teacher, that's what we did. That's what we knew. So just to separate that leveled readers, meaning is my child reading A, B, C, or, you know, is something that's arbitrary. And the assessments that were used to determine that are not the same as what we've been talking about now. We're not sure what a running record, which is what could determine that. We don't know what skills it's capturing, and it is arbitrary in the sense that it's not giving me information about these essential predictive skills that that really tell me how my child is doing at becoming a fluent reader with the ingredients that go into that. So, on grade level, for me, the way I would describe it is these essential skills. They're some of the high quality screeners that we have access to. They have research based benchmarks and cut points for risk, meaning they tell me as a kindergartner or as a first or third grader at this time in the middle of the year, what my level of accuracy or rate should be with this skill. And so that's golden information as a teacher. So these assessments really inform our instruction tomorrow. They're the kind of it's not like I always try to make sure teachers don't feel like this is punitive. These are like this is living, breathing information about how a child is doing right now, and it can inform you tomorrow. So I also try to make sure teachers have the language to explain that to parents. So when it comes to being on grade level, if I have to write a progress report or a report card or something for a parent like you, I want to be able to say, here's how your daughter, here's how the response patterns are presenting for your daughter with regard to nonsense words. Here's what she can do. Here's what she's struggling with. Here's what we're working on, the kind of
Mhm,
practice that we're offering, and then to let you know what the next step would be, if
mhm,
so that's a better understanding of what it means to be on grade level. So
mhm.
which skills are important for me to have mastered at this point and where I am on that continuum towards mastering them.
I wanna tell parents that so is the Dibbles, I don't know how to say it, the Dibbles or the Dibbles?
Dibbles, yes.
Dibbles,
Dibbles.
which is made by the University of Oregon, and it's a well-regarded assessment tools, and it's actually free. Any parent can just go on their website and download to learn more about it or maybe do a oral reading fluency check themselves.
Yes. So there's Dibbles, and then you'll hear several others, Acadians,
Okay.
which, long story short, they come from the same research group originally, but depending on where parents are in the country right now or their district, they may hear either one, but just to emphasize that they are capturing the same skills that we just talked about.
Okay, very good. And so, can we talk a little bit about spelling? Because this is often really, really challenging for dyslexia. My understanding is that with reading, it's more of a recognizing situation. So you can just recognize words or graphemes. Spelling is actually retrieval. You have to go get the letters that you need to make the sounds. Is it worth tracking?
Yes, so spelling absolutely should be monitored, translating what we've been learning to read into writing. So the ability to retrieve comes after, like you said, the ability to recognize. Spelling always, for any child, spelling always lags behind being able to recognize and read.
Mm,
It needs much more practice, much more repetition for a child that has dyslexia. And I'm just going to repeat that over and over again. The not being just exposed to it one day, but the ability to continue to practice it. So if I just learned
mm,
one spelling rule and I learned it well, but then we leave it behind and move on to another one, I do need opportunities to pull that skill in and practice it also with the new one that I've learned.
mhm,
So another thing when it comes to, I don't know if you wanted to talk about writing in general.
mhm,
Sometimes writing poses a deeper challenge for a child that has dyslexia. Spelling is one thing, but being able to write and organize a passage and all of that. And I'm sure you're aware of other scaffolding tools and technology that can be used when that's happening. So the same
Mhm.
idea when we talked about cognitive load, but there's tools that can be used to support students so that they're not grappling with all of the different functions that have
Mhm.
to occur when I'm trying to organize a passage and draft it and write it. I have a good friend who's a parent, also advocate, and has a son who's deeply dyslexic. And she told me, in terms of this retrieval, she said, if I showed you a picture of Snoopy, you'd be able to recognize. But if I then told you to draw it, it'd be very difficult. So, something that, yes, we must track spelling and make sure that we are keeping track of they keeping up with the rules, and the memorization we want to tend away from because that's not
Mhm.
going into my long term memory. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the metrics, and I going back to what you said about tracking, don't track everything all at once and track what you're working on. How do you sort of prioritize it all when a child is a couple years behind? I know you're saying, go back to where they're at. Where does spelling fit in that? Like if they're a couple years behind even in reading, do you just kind of do a little spelling to support their reading, or do you really try to bring it all together? Does that question make sense?
Yes. So I'll just use a grade 4 or 5 student, for instance, as an
Mhm,
example. Imagine that we tested back and find that that student's struggling at the nonsense word level or grade 1 level, or whatever program I'm going to be using, we're going to figure out where in the phonics sequence that student needs to begin learning and practice. The
mhm,
spelling is going to line up right with that because maybe I'm beyond nonsense words and I'm reading grade 1 or 2 level. There's going to be the phonics patterns and spelling that I just didn't learn or master at that time. So I'm going to be learning to read those words. I'm going to be doing dictation. I want to be reading decodable text with them included,
mhm,
and move along the sequence in order. When it comes to a student that is a little further behind like that, we want to accelerate, meaning, we're going to go as slow as we need and as fast as we can, which is a quote from, from we hear all the time in the
mhm,
field, meaning we don't want to frustrate the child, but we want to make sure we're giving you what you need. And when I say that, it's really that's a question as that parents can ask. I talk to
mhm,
leaders and teachers about this. When they're structuring their day and they're structuring intervention that they give to students when they've found this, I can't do it 2 days a week, 30 minutes. That's not moving the needle.
mhm,
I need to make sure, especially a student that's a little older, struggling with skills that are a few grades behind, I need
mhm,
to be seen every day as much as possible, even in double doses. So, those are questions that parents can ask,
mhm,
if they've described, okay, your child is at this point and here's what we're working on. All right. So please describe the group they're in, what kind of practice, how many times a week, how long the sessions are, how you're tracking it, and also describe how my child's data points are moving along, and
mhm.
just to have a discussion. But that is key in making sure what we're giving is actually moving the child quickly, because the older I am and the further behind I am, it's going to take time for me to catch up. But if I'm only giving you a little bit each week, that's not going to cut it.
Right, that makes sense, and I'm glad you brought up the questions that parents can be asking in terms of these data points. And I think the way you framed this whole discussion will help parents frame those questions and understand what they're looking for. What are cases maybe where technology is helpful and where maybe it's not in terms of capturing data and instruction?
I'm so glad you asked. So, when it comes to supporting struggling readers, I mentioned before there are types of technology we can tap into, or supports or scaffolds that we want to use and eventually fade that will help the student not be frustrated, whether that be, like I said, speech to text or a graphic organizer. Now, when it comes to assessing students, there's two things. There's some districts and areas that use what we call computer adaptive tests or CATs.
Mhm.
The type of assessment we've been talking about today that is so rich and wonderful for us,
Mhm.
those are called curriculum-based measurements. So that's one thing that we like to make sure parents and teachers understand the difference of what they can capture and what they can't capture. And
Mhm.
also when it comes to the kind of practice that you're talking about, we have to make sure things are accurate. Whatever we use with students must be valid and it must be reliable. We have to know that it's capturing what it says it's capturing, that it's doing it accurately, that if I use it or you use it or another educator uses it, that it will give the same types of results. I'd say that one of the biggest issues in our field when it comes to running a school or system, we have to make sure we're doing things that are best for the child, not convenient for the adult. When you sit with a child side by side and capture nonsense word or capture oral reading fluency, there's so much rich information that comes through in their
Mhm.
productive response, in their behavior. You are absorbing it and it
Mhm.
informs what you do tomorrow for practice.
Mm.
Something that is digital or can't necessarily capture all of that, and it's not us, it's not a person.
Mm.
So I'm not a huge fan, as you can hear, of certain types of technology. I would also mention there's a book I'm reading called The Digital Delusion: How
Okay.
Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning and How to Help Them Thrive Again. So we're reading it at the university, some of the professors. So yeah, just to have caution that what we're doing is really accurate, like it is the best thing for students and not just convenience.
Mhm. Right. I completely agree with that. All the rich information you're getting when you're seeing a child struggling with the nonsense words and figuring out where exactly they're struggling when we go back to those underlying skills. Have you seen any good tracking methods of tracking the data? I get all these disconnected PDFs often with a lot of words, and I make my own spreadsheets to understand whether my daughter is making progress. Um, how should parents think about that, or what should they be expecting?
So different screeners offer different, reporting, but the two that we mentioned today, there are progress monitoring graphs. I think that for a parent and for the teacher, that is the most important information that we want to pay attention to that a teacher can share with you. So if your child is struggling, I want to be delivering extra support and practice, and I should be capturing progress monitoring data hands down. It can't just be a feeling. It can't just be, something that I feel like I know. I need to
Mhm.
track it. And so they should be able to provide you with a screenshot where you can see here's this exact skill we're working on now, and here you can see the data points moving across the weeks. So that's most helpful, I think, for a parent to see.
Mhm.
You do want to see the what we call the benchmark windows. We capture screener data in the beginning, middle, and end of the year,
Mhm.
and that's great to see, and for the teacher to be able to explain where your child is on those measures. So those I think those two things are the best for a teacher to be able to provide a parent.
I'm glad you said that because, for us parents, we're not in the school system, and everything you just said is what I would expect, but then I'm not in it. So I second guess myself. Should I be expecting this? Is it too much? Makes sense to me, So hearing from an expert that those are basic things to be asking for, I think is really helpful.
Yes, and I was going to say that many of the platforms have a parent report, so they should include some information like that and maybe
Hmm.
some explanation of it. And I guess the other thing I was going to say is that the field is still learning too. Although I'm saying yes, these two things like the benchmark, where's my child, and then also progress monitoring, depending on where you are, your school system may be still learning. And I think the calls that I get to to present to help people with data interpretation, that is the most complex piece of this puzzle. So yeah, so not it to have some give them some grace because the
Mhm.
field is trying to learn something very complex also.
Yeah, especially when you have kids who need extra support and they're all at different levels and they're all working on different skills, and then you just multiply it across all the students. That is a really complex challenge. So, all of these years as an educator and as supporting educators around data and data driven decisions, what is something that data doesn't always capture?
I think one of the biggest things that I try to help leaders and teachers realize is that this is collaborative. It's hard work. It's all of us. It's the parents, the leaders, the teachers being able to work together. It takes time. And one of the biggest important things is you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. That's one. If you have started this work and putting for school leaders, if you've been starting to put the structures in place, you can't stop there. You know, putting the structures in place, the schedules, training, all of the different things, that's the start, but it is hard work and you have to stick with it to get to the
Mhm.
point where of what I'm just describing, which is a system. And I know we didn't talk about it, but a school-wide framework system, which is called multi-tiered system of supports. All of these things we're talking about moving together seamlessly to ensure we don't end up with a large amount of students struggling. We've worked in a way that is preventative and proactive, and we're able to provide all students with what they need on time. So I think that's the biggest thing that the the data doesn't tell us is that this is a all hands on deck effort, and the data will continue to look the way it looks if we don't kind of push our sleeves up and be courageous and be able to do whatever it takes.
Mhm.
To flex the entire school building to make sure these things are happening.
I love that answer. Is there anything that you're really passionate about that we didn't get to talk about today?
I think we got to it all.
Mhm.
These are wonderful topics. I would just say that for parents to learn a little bit about, listen to these podcasts, just learn a little bit about the measures. There's nothing I
Mhm.
think that a parent needs to do additional at home in terms of assessment. But if you know what these assessments are measuring, you'll have better language to ask great questions. Just validate your child, even when they're struggling, like you said earlier, that you realize, you just didn't learn that yet. Don't worry about it. And just to support them as best as you can, in the social and emotional realm of this, because it is hard work.
Well, thank you, Dr. Archie. I really appreciate you making time for us parents. It is really empowering when we finally understand these things and can ask the right questions. So it's because of experts like you that we can get informed. So I appreciate you taking time out for us today.
And thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.